That patch, you can buy those online. The banker laughed on Veterans Day morning. Name's Frank Dempsey. Retired colonel, just wanted to withdraw $300 under flickering fluorescent lights and the scent of burnt decaf. Kept quiet until I placed my old challenge coin on the counter. Ever seen a man salute in a bank lobby? What would you have done? Frank Dempsey stepped into Summit Valley Bank like it was still 1978, pressed flannel shirt, polished shoes, and a folded VA card in his wallet. There was a calm to his gait, the kind of unhurried dignity that didn't demand attention, but earned it anyway. He paused just inside the glass doors, removing his navy cap, and nodded toward the receptionist with a quiet morning. A faint breeze followed him in carrying the scent of fallen leaves and pine bark from the trees lining Fayette Hollow's Main Street. Behind the teller counter, a dusty radio played Sam Cooke, low and warm. You send me, barely loud enough to matter, barely soft enough to ignore. Frank signed in with neat cursive, took a seat by the tall ficus in the waiting area, and folded his hands over his knees. He carried no phone, no earbuds, no air of hurry. Just the small bulge inside his left coat pocket, a brass coin, and an old photograph nestled together that went unnoticed. For now. Rachel Quintero adjusted the collar of her bank-issued vest and called out, "Mr. Dempsey." He approached slowly, tipping his head the way Southern men did when they didn't quite bow. She offered a small smile. "Right this way, sir." He responded automatically, gently, "Yes, ma'am." At her desk, she took his ID and account slip. She looked young to him, but there was something practiced about her bearing. Military, he thought. The posture, the careful words. Her badge said teller trainee, but she scanned his discharge document with the eye of someone who knew what to look for. "I'd like to take out 300, Frank said. "My grandson plays cello. He's got recital fees due Friday." Rachel nodded and began typing, her fingers quick. Then they slowed. "Sir, this account. I think I need manager clearance. Just a moment." She stood disappearing behind the divider. Frank waited, hands folded once more. Travis Langford arrived with a practiced grin and a whiff of expensive cologne. His suit fit like he'd had it tailored that morning, and the pen clipped to his front pocket had gold trim. He sat across from Frank and didn't offer a hand, so Travis began scanning the papers. "You're withdrawing 300 today." "Yes, sir." Travis turned to Rachel. "These discharge papers, they're typed." "Yes," she said hesitantly. "They're dated 1973. Travis raised an eyebrow and chuckled. "Typed on a dinosaur, huh?" Rachel glanced at Frank, then back at the monitor. "They match the VA record." "I'm sure they do," Travis said, unconvinced. "But these days, anyone with a printer and an Amazon account can whip up something impressive." Frank reached slowly into his coat pocket. He pulled out a small velvet pouch and spilled 2 items onto the desk, a weathered 101st Airborne patch and a brass coin with an eagle etched deep into its surface. The coin caught Rachel's eye. She'd seen one like it at an Air Force base in Nevada years ago. Her breath caught, and she looked away. Travis leaned forward, inspecting the items. "Those patches," he said, smirking. "You can buy them online." Rachel's fingers stiffened against the desk. She opened her mouth, but Frank shook his head almost imperceptibly. "No need." He didn't argue, didn't scold. He simply nodded slowly, as if accepting a truth older than both men in the room. Then he stood, gathered his papers, and walked quietly to the window bench near the entrance. He sat, setting the patch in his palm and resting both hands on his lap. The radio changed to Roy Orbison. Rachel exhaled, lips pressed together. Back at her desk, she reached for his wallet to return it. Inside, tucked beside his driver's license, was a black and white photograph of a young woman in cat-eye glasses, her smile frozen in summer light. On the back, in looping script, Dorothy, 1963. She glanced toward Frank. He sat still as a statue, gazing through the window at the flag flapping atop the courthouse. She walked over, stooped beside him, and gently returned the wallet. "Thank you, ma'am," he said again, and looked down at the patch. Frank nodded slowly and steps aside, sitting silently by the window, his patch resting in his palm. Rachel knew that coin. Not personally, but she'd seen it once during a classified logistics briefing. It was 5 years ago, somewhere beneath a concrete wing of Fort Liberty, where people didn't wear name tags and everyone stood a little straighter. She'd just arrived, still green from the academy, when a graying colonel placed that exact kind of coin, heavy engraved and worn, on the steel table. Every officer in the room had stood, not because they were told, because they knew. The memory swirled as she stared at the desk where Frank Dempsey had been sitting minutes earlier. The patch, the coin, the silence he carried. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured coffee into a paper cup from the break room's burner. The smell masked nothing. The room still reeked of embarrassment, of the kind that crept beneath the skin. Travis was back to his usual banter, now half laughing with a customer at the front counter, the smirk still hanging on his face like a cheap necktie. Rachel stepped outside. The chill had sharpened since morning. Across the street, the flag tugged rhythmically in the wind above the courthouse dome, the metal halyard clinking softly against the pole. She walked 2 storefronts down to the corner coffee cart, where Sam, the owner, gave her a nod. "Refill?" he asked. "For a vet," she said with a faint smile. He tipped his chin. "Always free." She took her phone from her pocket. For a long moment she stared at the screen, then thumbed through the contacts until she found it, Lieutenant Colonel Weston R. She hesitated just once before hitting call. "Weston." "Sir, it's Quintero. Former Logistics Charlie Division. I'm at Summit Valley Bank in Fayette Hollow." Rachel, his voice softened just a touch. "Everything okay? I need to verify something." A customer came in, an older gentleman, withdrawal issue. He handed over a brass challenge coin. 101st Airborne. Name Dempsey. Frank Dempsey. The line went silent. She waited. Then Weston spoke quiet and clipped. "Don't let him leave. Sir, I don't care what you have to do. Stall, delay, pretend the ATM's broken. Just don't let him walk out that door." Rachel's spine straightened instinctively. "Understood." He exhaled once. "You said Summit Valley, Fayette Hollow." "Yes, sir." "I'll make the second call." She didn't ask who to. She didn't need to. Rachel pocketed the phone, fingers cold around the warm coffee. On the way back in, she passed Hal Bridger wiping the corners of a brass plaque beside the break room, squinting at the dust. His face changed as the name became clearer. "Well, I'll be he whispered, brushing the final smudge. "Frank Dempsey. This bank's original dedication. I remember now. Ceremony out front. 1974, I think." She walked past him into the lobby. Frank still sat at the window, unmoved, patch in hand. His fingers had curled around it now gently, like someone shielding a match from the wind. Rachel crossed the floor and sat on the bench across from him. "Sir," she said softly, "can I get you anything?" "Water, another seat." He shook his head. "I called someone," she added, almost a confession. "Someone who remembers." Frank's eyes flicked toward her, searching, measuring, but said nothing. Behind them, Travis was gesturing through the glass, trying to impress a couple with mortgage brochures. He didn't notice Hal move to his side, murmuring something low. Travis frowned, then squinted toward the dedication plaque. His smirk faltered. Outside tires whispered against asphalt. A black SUV merged off the main highway onto Main Street. The vehicle moved without sirens, without flash. The driver wore a deep blue uniform, buttons gleaming. In the passenger seat, a younger aide opened a case. Inside, cushioned in velvet, sat a star-shaped medal and a folded citation. Down the road, a black SUV merges into traffic. The driver wears dress blues. His aide holds a velvet box. The bank's doors didn't open. They parted like they knew who was coming. For a moment, no one moved. The hum of the fluorescents seemed to vanish. The faint tick of the lobby's wall clock fell silent. Even the printer near Rachel's station stopped mid-whir. The SUV outside idled in place, the reflection of its polished black frame cutting across the windows like a dividing line between two worlds. Then the driver's side opened. Rachel stood. Hal followed her eyes and murmured, "They're on their way," just as she had told him earlier. General Terrence Malloy stepped through the threshold, the crisp lines of his uniform undisturbed by the breeze outside. His medals glinted faintly under the bank's soft lighting, but it was his posture, tall, quiet, grounded, that silenced the room. He removed his cap, slowly tucking it under his arm, with the kind of precision that came not from habit, but reverence. He didn't scan the room. He didn't need to. His boots made no sound on the floor tiles as he walked one step at a time toward the waiting bench where Frank sat. Rachel's throat clenched as she caught a flash of the velvet box in the aide's hands, still unopened, still sacred. Travis was no longer at the counter. He had backed into the corner behind the teller wall, arms stiff at his sides, complexion pale. He didn't speak. He didn't dare. Hal remained still, one hand resting lightly on the dedication plaque he'd uncovered earlier. He didn't blink. Rachel stood just a step behind Frank, heart caught between beats. Malloy came to a stop in front of the old colonel. For a second, neither man moved. Then the general stood at full attention, eyes straight ahead, spine locked. And he saluted. Not a nod, not a smile. A full, formal, unwavering salute. Frank Dempsey rose. It took effort. His knees were slower now, and the coin still lay in his palm. But he stood tall, taller than the years allowed, and he returned the salute, precise, practiced, and with the weight of memory behind it. Still, no words passed between them. The aide stepped forward, placing the velvet box and a thick, sealed manila envelope gently on the counter. Malloy turned, voice even clear and resonant. "This man's name is on the foundation stone of this building." A murmur swept through the lobby, faint, reverent. A young man waiting in line placed his hand instinctively over his chest, eyes wide, breath caught. No one told him to. He simply did. Rachel felt something tighten behind her eyes, but didn't let it rise. Malloy turned slightly, directing his next words to Travis without ever looking at him. "You laughed at his patch. That patch outranks this entire building." The aide, silent throughout, opened the velvet box just a sliver. The metal inside wasn't for show. It was heavy. Earned. Not handed out in ceremonies with balloons, but in moments buried in deserts, remembered only by those who carried the scars. Travis sank slightly behind the teller wall. His usual luster had vanished, his polished smile nowhere in sight. Frank remained upright, motionless, coin still in his grip. Malloy turned again, facing him fully. His voice softened, but not his stance. "We've held this for decades. I think it's time you took it back." Frank didn't thank the general. He didn't correct Travis. He just sat back down, folded his hands, and waited. The general remained standing for a beat longer, eyes on the man before him. No salute now. Just mutual understanding. He stepped away, speaking not to Frank anymore, but to the room, low, steady, never theatrical. He designed 3 forward bases in less than 6 weeks during the Sahel crisis. 2 are still in operation, Malloy said, turning slowly toward the counter. His unit ran 37 humanitarian convoys post-deployment, uncredited, unpaid, unseen. No one interrupted. The printer behind Rachel gave a faint click, but didn't resume. The flag across the street fluttered without rhythm. Malloy reached into his coat pocket and removed an envelope, thick, clearly aged, but recently sealed. He laid it on the counter squarely in front of Travis. "File this," he said, tone without heat, "where it won't be lost again." Travis didn't respond. His shoulders curved inward, fingers flexing once, then twice around a pen he wasn't using. He looked at the envelope but didn't reach for it. Rachel stepped forward, her hand brushing against the surface near Frank's form. He hadn't moved. Still in the same seat, still with his hands folded neatly on his lap. The patch had slipped sideways on the cushion beside him, its threads frayed at the edge. "Mr. Dempsey," she said, voice soft. "If it's all right, I can help process your withdrawal now." He nodded just once. She turned, walking around the counter, carefully mindful not to make a show of anything. Each keystroke on her terminal felt deliberate, respectful. No rushed motions, no clipped tones. She entered his account number manually, bypassed the usual ID prompts, then paused. Hal approached with slow, unhurried steps. In his hand was something old, but lovingly maintained, a black fountain pen with silver detailing near the grip. "It still writes," he said, offering it gently to Frank. Frank accepted it without a word. Signed on the line with a hand that trembled only once. Rachel counted out the bills, 320s, and laid them gently into a simple envelope. "For your grandson," she offered, slipping it into his coat pocket with care. At the far end of the counter, Travis spoke. It wasn't loud. It wasn't rehearsed. I apologize, sir." Frank looked at him. His eyes didn't narrow. His mouth didn't lift. He simply nodded just once and turned away. Not in dismissal. Just done. Malloy moved beside him, his aide stepping forward with the velvet box. The general opened it slowly. Inside, resting against dark satin, was a medal. Unlike the others, a deep brass tone with the words, "Service Beyond Rank," etched in curved relief. Malloy held it out. "There's only a few of these," he said. "No ceremony, no speeches. Just this." Frank took it in both hands, the challenge coin still in his palm. For a moment, the medal and the coin touched. Rachel felt something shift. Not the air. Something older. Outside, sunlight angled through the bank's windows, illuminating the dedication plaque by the wall. Where dust had clung earlier, now the brass gleamed. Hal noticed. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Behind Rachel, a teenager in a hoodie lowered his phone. He hadn't been told to. He just did. And in that silence, no one missed the absence of beeps or chimes. The bank had grown quieter but not tense. Just respectful. Frank looked at the medal once, then closed the box and passed it gently to Rachel. "Hold on to that for me," he asked. "I still have errands." She blinked. "Of course." He stood. The fountain pen still nestled between his fingers. Then he turned to her again, eyes soft beneath the weight of decades. "Do you know where I can get a stamp?" My grandson likes postcards. Rachel asked the question no one else had dared. Why didn't you just tell them? Frank looked at her for a long second, the lines around his eyes softening, as though the words had touched something not forgotten, just long shelved. He reached into his coat and pulled out the wallet again, creased leather, held together at one corner, with a thin loop of electrical tape. He didn't open it fully, just enough to let his thumb graze the photo tucked inside. My wife used to say, he murmured, "They'll remember when they're ready." The old teller office had been cleared of forms and folders, the filing cabinet drawers long since stuck from disuse. The room now served as a break space or quiet corner. The blinds were halfway drawn, and sunlight filtered through in warm slats. A small fan oscillated in the corner. One wall bore framed photos of staff from the early 2000s. No one in the room matched their youthful smiles now. Frank sat in the corner chair, posture straight despite the years. He didn't fidget. He didn't sigh. Rachel watched him as one might a stone long submerged in a stream, still shaped by time but unyielding at the core. "She passed in '08, he said. "Dorothy. She used to do all the talking for us. Kept me decent." A smile lifted his mouth, not broad, not bitter. Just there. "Every Friday I send my grandson a postcard. Never missed one. Even when I was hospitalized last winter." Rachel leaned forward in the squeaky swivel chair across from him. Her hands were folded loosely on her knees. Malloy stood nearby, arms behind his back, letting the room belong to Frank. "Owen's applying to Juilliard," Frank continued. "Wants to major in cello performance. He's good. He's better than good. I told my daughter I'd handle the fees." "You shouldn't have had to explain that to anyone," Rachel said quietly. Frank gave a slight shrug. "Sometimes people forget they're carrying knives. Doesn't mean I have to bleed." Malloy, who had remained silent, stepped closer. "You trained the unit that trained mine," he said. "There's a protocol manual with a red spine, third shelf, still used at Fort Irwin. You wrote it, didn't you?" Frank didn't answer. But he nodded. "You saved lives." "I never met," Malloy said. "Just thought you should know." Rachel stood, printed the withdrawal receipt, and folded it once neatly before placing it in front of Frank. He didn't reach for it immediately. Instead, he opened the velvet box again. Not with ceremony, just quiet motion. The metal inside didn't shine so much as sit heavy. Not a symbol. A reminder. His eyes studied the engraving, "Service beyond rank." He nodded slowly. Not with pride. With something quieter. Acceptance. Behind him, the hum of the water cooler filled the brief silence. The blinds stirred with a breeze no one could feel. Rachel walked over, picked up her keys from the counter, and slipped them into her pocket. "If you're still up for it," she said, "I can take you by the post office. Help get that stamp." Frank smiled, not wide but full. "I'd like that." Malloy turned toward the door. His gaze lingered on the photo wall before shifting back to Frank. His voice didn't rise. "There's one more place that should carry your name." A week later, customers paused at the door, not because of the line, but because of the new engraving. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't in bold or gold or perched on a pedestal. It was a bronze strip, polished just enough to catch the morning sun as it poured through the lobby windows. Most of them wouldn't have noticed it before, not really. But now eyes lingered. It now read, "In honor of Colonel Franklin Dempsey, for those who served quietly." Hal Bridger came in earlier than usual that Friday. He walked a little slower now, favoring his left knee, but he insisted on polishing the lobby windows himself. Rachel had offered to help, but he'd smiled and said, "It's not for the glass." Then, with the same rag, he wiped the corners of the dedication wall fingers, trailing across the engraved name like brushing dust from a memory. Rachel arrived a few minutes after him, coffee in one hand, envelope in the other. The bank opened in 20 minutes. Flags fluttered outside. Across the street, Lou's Grill had taped photos of local veterans to its front windows. In the booth by the door, a spot Frank had always chosen, a handwritten sign stood propped beside the condiments. Seat held in quiet honor. FD. Rachel stopped short when she saw it through the glass. No one sat there. No one would. She exhaled, then made her way inside. At her desk, a thin-framed card sat waiting. She picked it up and placed it near the dedication wall just beneath the plaque. The inscription from the metal, plain and powerful, service beyond rank. Travis walked in shortly after. He didn't speak much these days, not because of guilt exactly, more like a man who'd been asked a question and was still listening for the answer. He nodded toward Rachel, offered a soft morning, and moved behind the teller counter without fanfare. The place had changed, but not loudly. Phones still rang. Receipts still printed with their usual buzz. But there was a softness in the way people spoke, in the way customers waited, in the way Rachel now held eye contact longer before breaking into a smile. A new teller started that day, a young man fresh out of community college. Nervous, overdressed, eager. He asked Hal about protocol, about forms, about the safe. Hal answered each question patiently. Then, as they stood near the dedication wall, the new hire asked, "Who was Colonel Dempsey?" Hal looked at the plaque. Then he leaned in a little closer. "Someone who understood that silence can carry more weight than speeches," he said. "Someone who knew what mattered without having to prove it." He said nothing more. Later that morning, Rachel opened the envelope she'd been holding. The letter inside bore the insignia of Fort Liberty. The language was formal, the font a standard military typeface. But the signature at the bottom was unmistakably personal. "In recognition of your service to those who served, Brigadier General Terrence Malloy." She folded the letter and tucked it into the top drawer. Not to display. Just to keep. At noon, Rachel took her break and crossed the street. Lou's was lively. Veterans ate free on the holiday, and the diner smelled of bacon grease and maple syrup. She didn't order anything, just stood by the booth a moment, then reached into her bag. She pulled out a small roll of stamps, vintage ones, the kind with lighthouses and state flowers. She placed them on the corner of the table next to the sign. Then turned, stepped outside, and looked up. The flag above the diner waved gently in the wind. Rachel stood quietly for a few seconds. Then softly, more to the breeze than to any passerby, she said, "Happy Veterans Day, sir." She smiled faintly and added, "Tell Owen we'll keep the stamp drawer full." Sometimes the quietest lives carry the loudest echoes, etched not in parades or headlines, but in folded hands and a promise kept. Colonel Dempsey never needed to be seen to make an impression. His kindness spoke in postcards, in patience, in showing up when it mattered. When we stop judging by appearances, we open the door to understanding, and perhaps even grace. If this story touched something in you, pass it on with the same quiet care. Like a porch light left on in the dark, even the smallest act of recognition can guide someone home.